In 1964, a quiet 26-year-old accountant opened the trunk of his green Plymouth Valiant at a dusty track meet in Oregon. Inside were 30 pairs of cheap running shoes imported from Japan. He had no store, no marketing budget, and no real product of his own. Traditional business logic said selling shoes out of a car was a guaranteed financial dead end. Yet, this exact desperate gamble did not just survive. It quietly triggered the most profitable brand disruption in modern history. But the real mystery is not how a shoe salesman became a billionaire. The real mystery is why the massive global giants ruling the athletic world never saw the lethal trap he was building right beneath their feet. To understand how Nike actually happened, you have to forget the myth of the genius shoemaker. Phil Knight was never a master designer, nor was he an impoverished street urchin. He was a middle-class kid with a severe case of social anxiety, an obsession with running, and a Stanford business paper that almost everyone ignored. In the early 1960s, the entire global running market was completely locked down by two German powerhouses, Adidas and Puma. They had the athletes, the prestige, and the elite factories. If you wanted to compete, standard economics said you needed millions in manufacturing capital that Knight simply did not possess. So Knight asked a radically counterintuitive question. What if you did not build the shoes at all? He had watched Japanese cameras quietly dismantle the dominant German camera industry purely by offering high-grade engineering at rock-bottom manufacturing costs. He wondered, could the exact same supply chain arbitrage work for running footwear? Without any corporate backing, Knight flew to Kobe, Japan. He walked straight into the headquarters of Onitsuka Tiger, a prominent shoe manufacturer. He was terrified. During the meeting, the Japanese executives asked him what company he represented. Knight froze. He did not own a company. Thinking on his feet, he remembered the blue ribbons he had won in track as a boy and blurted out, "Blue Ribbon Sports." The bluff worked. He secured the Western United States distribution rights for Tiger shoes with just $50 borrowed from his father. When the first shipment of 300 pairs finally landed in Oregon, Knight faced an immediate distribution crisis. Retail stores outright refused to stock an unknown Japanese brand sold by an unproven kid. Most entrepreneurs would have lowered the price or poured money into local advertisements. Knight did something completely different. He bypassed retail entirely and drove straight to where his target customers suffered in silence: high school and college track meets. Knight understood a profound truth about customer psychology that traditional retailers ignored. Runners did not trust slick salesmen in suits. They only trusted other runners who knew the brutal pain of blistered feet and shin splints. Knight spoke their language. He opened his trunk, talked split times, and sold shoes directly to the athletes. The shoes sold out almost immediately. But selling shoes out of a car is a hustle, not an empire. To turn this demand into an actual business, Knight needed a technical unfair advantage. He brought in his former college track coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman was not a businessman. He was a man possessed by a single obsession: shaving ounces off running shoes to make his athletes faster. Bowerman would literally rip imported shoes apart with scissors, rebuild the soles with experimental rubber compounds, and test them on his collegiate runners. This created an unprecedented feedback loop. Knight handled the cash flow and importation, while Bowerman acted as the world's most relentless research and development laboratory. Bowerman began sending detailed design blueprints back to Onitsuka in Japan, essentially telling them how to engineer a superior running shoe for the American market. The Japanese manufacturer built Bowerman's designs, and Blue Ribbon Sports sold them as fast as the cargo ships could dock. By the late 1960s, sales were doubling every single year. On paper, the business looked like an explosive success. But behind the scenes, a lethal financial trap was tightening around Knight's throat. The faster Blue Ribbon grew, the closer it came to total bankruptcy. Because the shoes were manufactured in Japan and shipped across the Pacific, Knight had to pay for inventory months before it ever reached American soil. Every dollar of profit, plus massive bank loans, had to be immediately poured back into ordering larger shipments. Knight lived in a permanent state of cash starvation. Local banks looked at his balance sheet and panicked. To a traditional loan officer, Knight had almost zero cash reserves and all his capital tied up in slow-moving ocean freight. One delayed shipment or one bad economic turn would wipe him out completely. Then, the true crisis hit. Onitsuka Tiger realized that the American market was booming entirely because of Bowerman's designs and Knight's grassroots distribution. The Japanese executives did not want a distributor anymore. They wanted the entire profit margin for themselves. An Onitsuka representative arrived in Oregon with a cold ultimatum. Sell 51% of Blue Ribbon Sports to Onitsuka, or your shoe supply will be cut off immediately. It was corporate blackmail. If Knight accepted, he lost control of his life's work. If he refused, his entire supply chain vanished overnight, plunging his over-leveraged business into immediate liquidation. Knight chose the most dangerous path imaginable. He smiled, stalled for time, and secretly began looking for independent factories across Asia to manufacture his own brand from scratch. He needed a name, a logo, and a production line before his supply line was officially severed. A local design student was paid $35 to draw a simple motion stripe, which became the swoosh. An employee woke up from a dream with the name of the Greek winged goddess of victory, Nike. In 1972, the partnership with Onitsuka officially exploded into lawsuits. Knight was suddenly on his own, holding thousands of unproven Nike shoes manufactured in unfamiliar factories. The initial batch was a complete disaster. The orange boxes arrived with crooked stitching, unstable soles, and defective leather. Retailers threatened to cancel all orders. Adidas executives watched from afar, convinced the chaotic American startup was about to self-destruct. At this exact breaking point, Bowerman walked into his kitchen on a Sunday morning. Looking at his wife's waffle iron, an insane realization struck him. What if the traction of a running shoe did not come from heavy metal spikes or flat rubber, but from raised, waffle-shaped rubber nubs that gripped the track while absorbing impact? Bowerman poured hot liquid urethane directly into the household iron, permanently ruining the kitchen appliance, but creating the first prototype of the waffle sole. When Nike released the waffle trainer, it was not just a design tweak. It was a mechanical revolution. The shoe was lighter, cushioned the foot against hard pavement, and looked radically different from anything on the market. Demand went parabolic. But the true genius of Nike's survival was how they cracked the code of consumer behavior. Before Nike, athletic shoes were strictly utility tools bought only by serious athletes. Knight realized that a massive cultural shift was happening in America. Ordinary people were beginning to run on public roads for health and fitness. Running was transforming from an elite competitive sport into an identity. Knight did not market shoe specifications. He marketed the emotional identity of the runner. When you bought an Adidas shoe in the 1970s, you were buying German engineering. When you bought a Nike shoe, you were buying membership into a rebellious counterculture of individuals pushing their personal limits against the clock. Yet, as Nike crossed into the 1980s and went public, an unforeseen competitor caught them completely off guard. A company called Reebok noticed that millions of women were taking up aerobics, and they released soft, fashionable leather shoes designed specifically for gym workouts. Nike, entirely blinded by its obsession with hardcore male runners, dismissed aerobics as a passing fad. Within 2 years, Reebok obliterated Nike's market share, surpassing them in total revenue. For the first time, Nike was losing its own game. Their core running shoes were becoming commoditized, and their brand was losing its edge. Knight realized they needed to pivot from being an athletic equipment company to becoming an emotional powerhouse that could dominate global pop culture. In 1984, Nike made an unprecedented bet. They took a massive portion of their marketing budget and placed it entirely behind a single, unproven rookie basketball player from North Carolina, Michael Jordan. At the time, sports endorsements were conservative. Brands signed athletes simply to wear their shoes quietly. Nike did the opposite. They created a custom signature line called Air Jordan, featuring bold black and red leather that directly violated the NBA's strict uniform color rules. The NBA fined Jordan $5,000 every single game he stepped onto the court wearing the shoes. A traditional corporate brand would have panicked and pulled the product. Nike did something diabolical. They paid every single fine out of their own pocket and launched a nationwide commercial campaign, stating that while the NBA could ban the shoe from the court, they could not ban you from wearing it. The shoe instantly transformed from a piece of sports gear into an emblem of rebellion, individuality, and street culture. Kids stood in lines wrapping around city blocks. The initial projection of $3 million in sales exploded into over $126 million in the very first year alone. Nike had discovered the ultimate business model. They realized that footwear manufacturing was a low-margin commodity, but brand myth-making was an infinite-margin asset. By outsourcing physical production to optimized global factories and focusing entirely on high-concept design, athlete storytelling, and emotional branding, they engineered a moat that no competitor could easily duplicate.